Ladies and gentlemen, I have wonderful news for you. Oil Armageddon, but not for the world, for Iran. You'll understand why in a moment. They argued, called each other names, swore they'd never speak again. I swear on my mother. And then immediately called each other like, so when are we meeting again? Where? Same place or Turkey? The coffee's stronger there. You really didn't expect this? We've just never taken part in negotiations with the East. Not the Far East, but the real East, which is a delicate matter. And where things are delicate, that's where we'll drink to the true friendship between Muslim peoples and idol worshippers. Like, why are you offended? We were just joking. Ha 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 ha. You didn't expect that, right? But negotiations between the US and Iran are resuming. A new round of direct negotiations between the US and Iran may take place as early as this week, even though the blockade has just come into effect. The key disagreement is the opening of the Hormuz Strait. We didn't expect that, right? At the same time, war and diplomacy, well, that's just classic. But the thing is, more than 40 countries are forming a coalition led by Britain. A senior NATO officer told CBS News, I think, that Britain is leading the planning of a coalition of more than 40 countries for what purpose? To open the Hormuz Strait and protect the freedom of navigation. Opalpa. You didn't expect that. Yes, Iran imposed a blockade and Trump closed it with a lid, and now pressure is building up there. But you'll soon find out about the pressure that's building up there. China warned the US that things will go badly. I think he said things would be very bad, but he hasn't said exactly what yet. China's defense minister Dong Jun stated, "We have trade and energy relations with Iran. We expect others not to interfere in our affairs. The Hormuz Strait is open. But unlike the British, the French, and others," he said, "open for us." Well, a third U.S. aircraft carrier is heading here. Is it going there for pancakes or something? Just for a ride because they're bored? Is this a direct threat of confrontation between the Americans and the Chinese? Or is it an indirect threat, something like the Soviet fig in the pocket? We'll thumb our nose at you, but we won't show it. We keep it in our pocket. In other words, you get nothing, but you don't know about it. And you won't find out. We're smart, not brave. And of course, you wanted to know how much it costs to raise a child while living in a medium-sized or large city in the U.S. I'll tell you, and you'll immediately understand why our birth rate is so low, but more on that later. But now, before revealing the secret of the birth rate, let's talk about the sensation of the day, about the fact that Armageddon will begin for Iran in 12 days. And it's an oil Armageddon. And how will this affect the war, peace, and the need for the Ayatollahs to buy an apartment building in the Moscow suburbs? Maybe even two. Maybe even two. Friends, today we're going to talk about a ticking time bomb. And it's not a metaphorical one, but a real one, measured in barrels of oil and days until disaster. And we can already say exactly when it will happen. Let me cheer you up. It's in 12 days. Want me to calculate it? It's easy. Iran will face something its leadership always forgets to mention. In fact, they're completely silent about it. The country's oil storage facilities are filling up completely. There will be nowhere to put the oil. They need to win or not win, but they have to do it to make it look like they've won at least a little in these 12 days. They're on the hot seat. And then Tehran will have to do something that could bring unexpected consequences to its economy. Irreversible damage if they stop production. It's not like just turning a faucet, but that's just one of the blows. While Iran is under siege, Saudi Arabia has launched a pipeline bypassing, of course, the Strait of Hormuz at full capacity, and the U.S. is blocking every ship going to or from Iranian ports. The USS George Bush Carrier Strike Group is moving toward the theater of operations, and the Western coalition is already discussing what to do about Iran. After the war, here is the complete picture, how all of this works, why it is deadly for the regime, and what awaits the region next. By the way, for those who haven't subscribed yet, you now have an amazing opportunity to do this absolutely free and to click the bell for free. No, you don't have to pay for a subscription on other days either. It's just that today you don't have to either. Well, those who subscribe can watch me. By the way, you can check the description. My book is there, which, by the way, you can also download for free, and then you'll receive it at the same email you used to download the book. Every day you'll get 10 minutes of absolutely wonderful videos about how to build the world we've only dreamed of. The one we dreamed about when we were going to the United States of America. In other words, how to build the America of our dreams. But now, back to everyday life, our military daily routine. On February 28, 2026, the U.S. and Israel carried out joint airstrikes on Iran. Supreme Leader Khamenei and a number of high-ranking officials, including military personnel, were killed. The targets were nuclear facilities, command centers, and air defense systems. Iran responded immediately. You know all this, right? Hundreds of rocket drones were launched at Israel and American bases. Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and shipping in the Strait of Hormuz were also targeted. The strait was effectively closed. The Strait of Hormuz, as you know, is a bottleneck. In peacetime, about 20 million barrels of oil pass through it each day. Millions of barrels of oil per day. The closure of the strait caused an immediate shock on the oil markets. On April 8, the U.S. and Iran, with Pakistan as a mediator, agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. Iran was supposed to open the strait, but Iran, let's say, took money from the tankers, $2 million for passage, but the strait was never actually opened. First, the Americans said. On April 12, negotiations were held in Islamabad. J.D. Vance announced that there was no agreement. Second, the Americans said. Trump wrote on Truth Social, the U.S. is immediately imposing a blockade on all Iranian ports. The 2-week countdown has begun. The deadline is around April 22, and every day of this period works against Iran. Let's figure it out. Why isn't overflowing storage just an inconvenience? According to analysts' estimates, the total capacity of Iran's onshore oil storage is 50 million barrels. At the time the blockade began, they were filled to 60%. There was about 18 to 20 million barrels of free capacity left. Iran produces about 3 million barrels per day. Domestic consumption fluctuates. The export surplus, which used to go abroad, mostly to China and India, that's about 1.5 million barrels per day. Simple math. 18 to 20 million barrels of free capacity, 1.5 million barrels of excess oil per day. Divide one by the other. The storage tanks are filled to the brim. In 12 days, they calculated. April 27-28. And that's it. And stop. The sham blockade brought exports to zero. No oil, nowhere to put it. The timer is running. There are 12 days left. You might ask, why can't we just turn off the tap? Just shut it off and that's it. But an oil well isn't a water faucet. These are mature fields. And in Iran, these are exactly what make up the basis of production. They operate under reservoir pressure. You pump out the oil. You have to force it with something to keep the oil flowing. The pressure is maintained by injecting gas and using special methods to increase oil recovery when the well is shut down in an emergency. Several things happen. First, the reservoir pressure drops sharply. Second, the structure of the reservoir is disrupted. Third, part of the reserves becomes physically inaccessible. And here's some news you might like. It stays that way forever. Iranian fields were already losing production, about 8 to 10% per year due to natural depletion. A forced shutdown will accelerate this degradation many times over, according to experts. A forced shutdown of mature Iranian fields. It will lead to an irreversible loss of 300 to 500,000 barrels per day. That's $9 to $15 billion in annual revenue. Forever. Let's add to that the direct losses from the blockade. Plus, Iran was receiving $139 million a day from oil exports, plus petrochemical exports. Another 54 million DC. So the total trade losses are estimated, if you just turn off the tap, just shut it, at $435 million a day. To be fair, Iran was preparing for this. According to the data they themselves were spreading on the eve of the blockade, Tehran, anticipating the actions of the U.S., sent several dozen loaded tankers out to sea in advance. It's extremely difficult to track them. They turn off these very transponders and drift somewhere out there in the open sea. According to estimates, these floating storage units can hold up to 170 million barrels of oil. In other words, that's enough reserves for us. Give or take, that's 8 days of supply for the buyer. But of course, clever move, very good, well done. but it only postpones the crisis. In fact, it doesn't even postpone the crisis. Land storage facilities are still filling up. The blockade remains. Production will still have to be stopped. And every extra day of downtime brings that very irreversible damage closer. Now let's move on to what truly changes the geopolitical game. The pipeline that has been waiting for its moment. 45 years. 45 years. Saudi Arabia launched the Petroline. That's what they called it. It's an east-west oil pipeline system running at full capacity. It's a network about 1,000 kilometers long that connects the kingdom's oil fields in the east with the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea coast. This pipeline was built back in the 1980s. That was when the war between Iran and Iraq first threatened transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia had been preparing for this day for 45 years, and now it has come. Within hours after the first strikes by the U.S. and Israel, Aramco began redirecting oil through the pipeline. Today, Petroline is operating at its maximum capacity, 7 million barrels per day. Of that, about 2 million are used for the domestic needs of Saudi refineries. Another 5 million or so are exported through Yanbu, plus 700 to 900,000 barrels of petroleum products. Saudi Arabia secures about 85% of its pre-war export volume without the military and without the Strait of Hormuz. So what does this mean for Iran? The logic of Iran's strategy has always been based on one key assumption. If the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the global economy will come under pressure and force the U.S. to back down. Iran believed that this was its geopolitical shield and that it was impossible to break through. But this shield started working against Iran itself. As long as Iran keeps the strait closed, it deprives itself of income. And it doesn't inflict the pain on the world economy that it was counting on, and the Saudi pipeline absorbs the blow. Moreover, running the Petroline at full capacity is not a temporary measure. Bloomberg directly called this move a strategic masterstroke. Saudi Arabia has integrated the Hormuz bypass into its long-term export architecture. Even if the strait opens tomorrow, the kingdom will use the pipeline in parallel as insurance. To be honest, Saudi Arabia's bypass route has its weak points. Oil from Yanbu has to pass through another strategic strait, Bab el-Mandeb, which connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, and on the Yemeni shore of this strait are the Houthis. The Houthis have already declared that they are ready to attack shipping in the Red Sea again in solidarity with Tehran. Besides this, at the beginning of April, there was a withdrawal. One of the pumping stations of the Petroline was attacked, which temporarily reduced its capacity by about 700,000 barrels per day. On April 12, the Ministry of Energy of Saudi Arabia confirmed that the pipeline had been restored to full capacity, but the very fact is telling: a tax. Iran or its allies understand the strategic importance of the Petroline and will try to disrupt it. So far, they haven't been very successful, but they will keep trying. On April 13, 1926, at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the U.S. naval blockade came into effect. CENTCOM announced that the operation applies to all ships, listen up, entering or leaving Iranian ports. In the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, regardless of the flag. An important clarification: transit shipping through the Strait of Hormuz to ports of third countries is not being blocked by the U.S. The U.S. does not want to completely strangle the global economy. They want to specifically strangle Iran's economy. Already in the first 24 hours, CENTCOM reported 10,000 American servicemen, more than a dozen warships, and dozens of aircraft are enforcing the blockade. Not a single vessel tried to break it. 6 commercial ships were intercepted and sent back to Iranian ports. So, what exactly has been blocked? The main thing is oil, of course, but that's not the only blow. More than 90% of the country's foreign trade passes through Iranian ports, amounting to about $110 billion a year. The key facility is Kark Island, through which 92% of Iran's oil exports pass. Petrochemical facilities in Asaluye and the port of Imam Khomeini are also blocked. Iran has lost everything. Oil, petrochemicals, imported goods, components, food. These aren't sanctions with loopholes. This is a physical blockade. Trump wrote that he ordered the Navy to intercept every ship in international waters that paid Iran for passage. He also threatened to attack Iranian speedboats in a style similar to operations against drug traffickers. Immediately and without warning, boom, and it's gone. Now it bears a third name. George Bush, the last in the series of Nimitz-class carriers, the 10th in total, left the naval base in Norfolk. Its strike group includes 3 destroyers, supply ships, a nuclear submarine, and, I think, 80 or 90 aircraft. This includes fighter jets, electronic warfare aircraft, those Growlers. According to the latest information, Bush is off the coast of South Africa, and is moving toward the region. In the coming days, it will enter the operation zone. So before its arrival, the U.S. kept 2 aircraft carriers in the region, Lincoln and Ford. After the fire on board, Ford moved to the Mediterranean Sea for repairs, but continues to participate in the operation. And what difference does the third one make? 3 carrier strike groups in one region is an unprecedented concentration of American naval power. I don't even remember if something like this happened during Operation Iranian Freedom, which was in 2003. One aircraft carrier is capable of generating about 120 combat sorties per day. 3 aircraft carriers, gentlemen, that's 360 sorties daily. This means the ability to deliver massive strikes on several target clusters simultaneously, without pause, one after another, one after another. Analysts, however, point out that Bush is coming not so much as a tool of escalation, but rather as a solution to a logistical problem. Ford is worn out, it has spent a record amount of time at sea and needs to be replaced. Bush ensures continuity, not a doubling of strike capability. Nevertheless, the signal is crystal clear. The United States of America is not going to leave. The campaign continues, and every week there are at least 2 full carrier groups in the region. At the same time as the blockade, 2 American destroyers have already passed through the Strait of Hormuz, apparently for reconnaissance and to demonstrate navigability. The actual mine clearance will be carried out by the following vessels: minesweepers, helicopters, and underwater drones. This will take time, but the process has begun. As soon as the strait is cleared, all global shipping will resume this transit. And this will finally nullify Iran's last trump card. So now, what if Iran still doesn't give up? Because we just won't give up no matter what. We'll die like someone. A 2-week truce was declared on April 8th. It expires around the 22nd. The negotiations in Islamabad failed on April 12th. The blockade began on April 13th. So Iran has less than 10 days left to make a decision. The Iranian leadership is putting forward absolutely unacceptable conditions. Not for peace, not for the U.S. They want all sanctions lifted, military reparations, international recognition of Iran's sovereignty over the Hormuz Strait. That's why China will say, the Chinese Sea is ours. And someone else will say, that's ours too. The U.S. insists on its own terms: elimination of the nuclear program, limitation of the missile arsenal, opening of the strait, and stopping support for proxy groups, terrorist groups. This isn't some small negotiating gap, a little back and forth. This is an abyss. And while both sides stick to their positions, each day of the blockade brings Iran closer to economic collapse. And they know it. What will happen after the deadline? Trump hinted at strikes on energy infrastructure, power plants, and bridges. CENTCOM has all the means for this. Additional Bush ambition adds operational flexibility. The question is not whether Iran can withstand a naval blockade. The question is whether the Iranian economy can withstand it. And exactly how many days it has for that. In parallel with military operations, the U.S. is forming a coalition for post-war administration of the region. This is an unprecedented step to build a post-war architecture before the fighting is over. Some might say it's sheer arrogance. Several groups of countries are drawn into the orbit of American efforts. The first are military partners who participated in the operations. British bases in Cyprus are used to protect Jordan's airspace from Iranian drones. The fleets of Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain have already been sent to Cyprus. They supposedly don't want to participate in military actions, but they were sent to Cyprus anyway. The second group is key regional allies. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Jordan, and Kuwait. They provide bases, logistics, and in the case of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, naval patrols in the strait together with American ships. The third group is strategic partners whose interest in keeping the strait open is obvious. That is Germany, France, Japan, South Korea, India, and others. Germany and France are urging Iran to observe the ceasefire and ensure open navigation. Like, what was that cat's name, Leopold? Yeah, let's all live in peace. And India, whose oil tankers were stuck in the region, was forced to negotiate directly with Tehran for paid passage. There won't be anything like that anymore. Azerbaijan, by the way, plays a special role. Vance visited Baku in February. Azerbaijan borders Iran from the north and is potentially a pressure point on the northwestern front of the Iranian regime. And there are about 20 million ethnic Azerbaijanis living in Iran, right on the border with Azerbaijan. Draw your own conclusions. The publicly discussed post-war goal is neither occupation nor annexation. It's what analysts call the Iraq model. After 1991, that is, a system of coercion and containment without the physical presence of troops on the Iranian border. Of course, the difference with Iraq should be huge. Iraq was a complete mess. Bardel, as Hebrew speakers say. They had a brothel there, but not a brothel, it was chaos. Specific elements: international control over Iran's nuclear program, not the kind of control they had before, real control, an inspection regime for missile sites, a permanent naval presence of the Allies. Why is this necessary? It's very simple. So they can't say, that's it, you won't visit us anymore. Goodbye. We'll close the gates. What gates will you close? The gates are in our hands. Trump spoke about a more radical option, in fact, establishing control over Iran's oil infrastructure. Infrastructure, I would say. My favorite thing is to take Iran's oil. He said this in an interview with the Financial Times. It sounds better in English. In Russian, it's my favorite thing. What would I want most of all? Trump said. Kark Island was mentioned as a potential target. The U.S. and Israel believed that after Khamenei's assassination and the weakening of the IRGC, Iranians would revolt and the regime would fall from within. The protests at the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026, when thousands of people died at the hands of the regime, seemed to provide grounds for this. But it didn't happen, at least not in the form that I think Washington and Tel Aviv were counting on. The regime, though decapitated and weakened, continues to hold on. Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, has been declared the new supreme leader. The IRGC retains its commanding role and chain of command. Nevertheless, the coalition maintains contacts with Iranian and Kurdish opposition groups in the north, as well as figures from the Iranian diaspora, including Reza Pahlavi. This is a long-term bet, not for a quick victory, but for the gradual erosion of the regime. How does this change the equation for Tehran, you may ask? That's the point. If it were a direct war between the U.S. and Iran, Tehran would have an argument for its domestic audience. We are standing against the enemy. But when the entire Persian Gulf, all the neighbors, half of NATO, and most of the major consumers consolidate against Iran, Iran is not a victim of imperialism. It becomes a country that stands alone against the rest of the world, just like Russia. And it loses economically, day by day. Let's take a minute to step away from military maps and barrels of oil, because behind all of this lies a question that the study of freedom deals with, which in fact is what I teach. The Iranian regime is a state built on coercion. Coercion to religious submission, coercion to political silence, coercion to economic dependence on the authorities. Friedrich Hayek described, centralized control over resources is control over lives. The Iranian theocracy controls oil and through it, everything else. Now this control is collapsing. It's collapsing before our eyes, not because American bombs are more just or less just, but because a system deprived of its economic foundation cannot exist. Ludwig von Mises, you all know who that is, I hope, said that economic calculation is the circulatory system of any complex society. When the money runs out, the ability to maintain an army, pay officials, and subsidize loyalty also ends. This is not a question of morality. It's a matter of economic physics, or mathematics, or biology. call it what you will. The Iranian people have paid a monstrous price for this regime. Thousands killed in the January protests, decades of sanctions, the destruction of the middle class, the emigration of the best minds. Well, it's just like Russia, gentlemen. The story unfolding now is not the end of the Iranian people. It is perhaps the end of the Iranian regime. Let's hope for that. What happens next depends on whether the Iranian people will have a chance to choose their own path, or if it will be chosen for them again, just by different masters. Here is the question that should really concern everyone. Who will choose, the people or someone else for them? So, let's sum up. First, in about 10 days, Iran's oil storage facilities will be full. Production will have to stop. This will cause irreversible damage. From 300 to 500,000 barrels of daily production will be lost forever. That is, it's $915 billion in annual revenue forever. Second, the Saudi Petroline pipeline has reached its full capacity of 7 million barrels per day. Iran's main trump card, the threat to block global oil supplies, is being neutralized. It's not completely neutralized yet, but it's on the way. Third, the U.S. has completely blocked all Iranian ports. Every ship, every cargo, every dollar is under the control of the American Navy. Fourth, the aircraft carrier Bush is moving toward the theater of operations. The U.S. is ensuring the continuity of military presence, regardless of how long this control lasts. The conflict. With the arrival of this group, we are showing we are there for the long haul. Fifth, the Western coalition is already building the post-war architecture: control over the nuclear program, freedom of navigation, deterrence without occupation. The 2-week deadline is expiring. Tehran is facing a choice that is getting narrower every day. If you find this analysis useful, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. We analyze events differently than the official media do. We look at the roots, the mechanisms, the reasons, and what is really happening. And now let's return to where we started. To birth rates and to spending on the burden that nobody needs, called children. These are such noisy, annoying, snot-nosed creatures that are often found near people. According to LendingTree's analysis, the cost of raising a child until the age of 18 in 2026, it amounts to $303,418 US. That's $16,857 per year. The calculation is made for a family with an average income of about $100,000, taking into account tax deductions. Not for billionaires. Of course, college is not included. God forbid you send your child off to brainwashing without even getting paid for it. Like, give me your child, we'll pay you and brainwash them. No. And they demand that you pay for it too, for confusing your children. College on average adds $152,000 in debt or expenses, right? What makes up the expenses for this unnecessary luxury called children? Housing. The biggest expense, 29 to 33% of the total amount. That's an extra bedroom. It costs about $3,500 to $6,500 a year. Food is 15 to 18%. A teenager easily adds $400 a month to the grocery bill. Teenagers can be called machines that chew up anything. Health care. Even with corporate insurance, adding a child costs $2,000 to $5,000 a year, plus braces, glasses, doctor visits, transportation, car seats, and teenage car insurance. It's like playing with matches. That's another $3,000 to $6,000 a year since 2023. The speed of rising costs. It became completely impossible. From 2023 to now, it's gone up by 27%. The cost of raising a child has increased by 27.8%, so don't ask why Americans aren't having children. There's a direct connection to birth rates. Since 2007, the U.S. birth rate has dropped by 23%. In 2007, 4.3 million children were born. But in 2025, only 3.6 million, even though the country's population has grown during this time. The total fertility rate is now about 1.57 children per woman. That's significantly below the replacement level. The replacement level is 2.1 children per woman. In order for the population not to decrease, each woman in America needs to have 2.1 children. Each one, every woman, What do Americans themselves say? 43% cite lack of money as the main barrier to having children. 22% say they just don't want to. They are honest people. Most say they want to but can't afford it. The proportion of childless women aged 25 to 29 has increased from 50% in 2014 to 63% in 2024. 63% of all women at the age when they should already be having children are not having any at all. So I understand that today it's possible to have children after that age, but usually women used to have children before 30. Is that true or is it a lie? When people talk about why they aren't having children, there are two competing explanations. Some say that Americans aren't having children because they're too wealthy and simply don't want to lower their standard of living. Why do I need this? My quality of life will get worse. Others say it's because they're too poor and can't afford it. I think both explanations contain some truth and actually work simultaneously. What does this mean strategically? The decline in birth rates directly threatens the solvency of Social Security. The fewer young workers there are, the fewer contributions go into the system, which, by the way, supports 70 million retirees. Trump, meanwhile, sharply reduced immigration. That was the only buffer that compensated for the demographic deficit. Population growth dropped from 1% to 0.3% per year. The country has 350 million people. Let's do the math. The replacement rate stayed the same as before, 350 million, 2.1 children per woman. The actual rate in the U.S. is 1.57. This means that each generation is about 25% smaller than the previous one. The length of one generation is, let's say, about 30 years. It used to be less, but now people have children at an older age. The birth rate changes, but no country maintains the same rate for 500 years, of course. Both economic crises, wars, and politics, all of it has an impact. The post-war so-called baby boom, which I'm also part of, was exactly that kind of correction. But the real threat, it doesn't come when a nation disappears, when everything, so to speak, becomes zero. No. The danger is not disappearance, but economic collapse, because it happens much earlier than disappearance. When the ratio of working people to retirees falls below a critical level, the entire social support system collapses. Healthcare, the military. This will happen in just 40 to 60 years if things keep going this way, not in 500 years. So the only hope is that artificial intelligence will work for us, or rather for our unborn children. Robots with intelligence, but they might get tired of working for us. For example, the Anunnaki created humans to work for them, but humans decided the work was too hard and rebelled. But that's not a problem for my generation anymore. Let my great-grandchildren worry about that. Maybe my grandchildren will consider it, but my great-grandchildren definitely will. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are plenty of interesting things happening in the world. Until the next episode, and I'll tell you something very important at the end. Something extremely important. Stay free. It's much better than being a slave. Well, much better. Goodbye.